And good morning, everybody. Welcome to what the hell? What the hell is that? Welcome to What the Hell is Water. This is episode 104. Today is Tuesday, May 24th. We are so glad to have you guys with us. And yesterday, you gotta do a good old -1 to find out that yesterday was episode 103. So if you didn't join us, we had a lovely chat. Who did we chat with yesterday? Chineret. That's who we chatted with yesterday. So yesterday I talked with a friend, Chineret, about sorry, I'm getting a little something in my throat this morning, which my guest is probably her fault. We'll find out about that in a second. Utilizing networks of people and thoughts to improve the world. That was our topic for yesterday. And we talked about the value of plugging in with other people and getting ideas and working together on a problem. And yes, of course, that can occur in person, and I strongly encourage that to happen in person. But we also talked about how that can happen online and what that can look like in an online community that is working together to create new ideas. Chineret had recently run Rome Book Club number 7, which for those of you who are regular listeners, you may have heard us talk about Rome Book Club 5 and 6, which myself and one of our other co-host writers have participated in. So he, having done number 7, wanted to get a little bit of his thoughts on what it was like running it, and also just, having chatted with him a few times and can tell that he's somebody who really thinks passionately and cares passionately and is wanting to try and help improve the world. I thought he would be a great person to chat with. He told us a little bit about his company, Weave Your Legacy. He talked within the Rome Book Club. The last book they looked at was called Well-Being: 5 Essential Elements. And the 5 elements that are in that book are purpose, social, financial, physical, and community. And we talked briefly about those. And then we also talked about something called the personal business model. There's something called the business model framework, which is essentially a 1-page document that you can create to kind of make a business plan, but in a simple way that is not overwhelming, is easily updatable, and things like that. And they actually have taken that business model framework and applied it to your personal life. So something called Business Model U, and Chineret has experience with that and incorporated it into his Rome Book Club. And of course, I really enjoy the idea of treating yourself like a business. I had cautioned yesterday, there are downsides of making sure that you don't go too far, right? But there's a lot of benefits of looking at your life as if it's a business, trying to figure out, hey, where do I want to go? What do I want to do? And setting what those goals are, and then figuring out, all right, do I have the resources? Do I have the team? Do I have the support I need to help me achieve those things? And who are the people involved? And of course, so much more than that. So we talked a little bit about that as well. And of course, we talked about how the Rome Book Club went and some of his main takeaways as someone who has done the facilitation. And a little bit of a teaser is that some of the biggest things that he came away with were, go in with your planning and your structure, but make sure to be flexible and willing as you get a whole bunch of new voices and new sets of ideas. Be willing to let that influence where things go. And of course, between the networked thought and the network aspect of the people, and of course the community aspect of the five essential elements that he's talking about, we kind of tie a lot of those things all in together as we discuss our topic for today. But you'll just have to find out what that is in a second. Helpful for life. And we are back. Welcome to What the Hell is Water, episode 104. Today is Tuesday, May 24th, 2022. And today we're going to be talking about the power of travel. And we have a repeat guest for today as my friend Caylena Cahill, who you guys may remember from, I think it's episode 80 or so. We'll share a link to that in a chat. Not a chat, but the chat. And yes, it was episode 80, and that was an aspiring creative entrepreneur questioning design, travel, and love. That's what I titled that one, much to her chagrin. And today we're talking about travel, which was one of the things that she had mentioned, and we talked a little bit about in the last episode. But fresh off of a multi-week trip to Peru, and also having done a nice trip to Hawaii for the first time last year, and having travel being something that she staked as this is something important to me and something that I want to try and incorporate into my life, I thought that it would be a great conversation to have with Caylena. When I was talking with Danielle, I was like, hey, Danielle, do you want to be in on this conversation? And she's like, well, yes, of course I do. I would love that. But I know you two would have a lot to chat about, and that also for reference, I went to Peru with my brother and a handful of other countries in South America back in 2017, actually right before I quit my job to start this company. So, of course, this is going to be a great one for me as I relive some of my journeys and hear some of the things that Caylena did. So we'll talk a lot about the trip itself, but also about just kind of the power of travel and what it can do for you and what it's good for. And, sometimes it's the perfect medicine. And I highly recommend that you travel, even if it's just to another town over. I highly recommend that you intentionally travel somewhere. And we'll elaborate on why that's important in a second. But without further ado, let's get over to our guest, Caylena Cahill. Good morning.
Good morning. Buenos dias.
Buenos dias. Sorry for throwing you under the bus before you even came on, but right after we did our little pre-show talk, I think I had a little tickle in my throat.
I can't infect you from the other side of the country.
Ah, dang it. I thought it was possible. Other side of the country. So where are you hailing from, Caylena?
Thankfully, it is not possible to infect you over the internet.
Yes,
I mean,
thankfully.
unless it was a computer virus.
Mm-hmm. Put
But
all systems on
unfortunately, the
guard.
coronavirus is not a
Yes,
computer virus.
yes. Fortunately not. So where are you hailing from, Caylena?
I am currently in my, I guess you could call it hometown, for lack of a better term, Newburgh, New York.
Nice. So we actually
Adulthood hometown. Let's put it that way.
adulthood hometown. I like that.
It's
We had
not where I grew up.
we had a show that was not last Friday, but the Friday before, where we did. It was actually a Thursday Friday combo, but it was the top 10 movies we think everyone should see. I brought on 3 people who told us their list, and we discussed them. And one of the guys, I went to New York, and I was like, oh, okay, so you're implying New York City. I was like, I know some people who don't live in New York City. There's more to the state than just the city.
Oh, thank you for sticking up for the whole rest of New York State.
You're welcome. Those darn New York City people. Oh,
Yeah,
man.
and we continue to have an argument about what constitutes upstate New York.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
What's your 2 cents on it?
I do not live in upstate New York. But anyone who lives in Manhattan would say that I live in upstate New York because I am 60 miles north of New York City.
Yeah.
But upstate is still another like 70 miles north of me.
Yeah, well, it's funny because here in Dallas Fort Worth, DFW, 60 miles, like that's still within the metropolis of
Oh yeah,
DFW for sure.
it's pretty like suburban throughout a lot of where I live. I mean, I live in an urban area. It's small, but it's urban. And there's like, I mean, the 60 miles that I am north of New York City by, like, it's still part of the metro area because we have the Metro Transit Authority train that goes here.
Nice.
So
MTA
people
represent.
commute. Yeah. Yeah. MTA for those who are familiar with acronyms from New York. Um, yeah. The commuter train goes here. People commute from here. This is not upstate. This is
Yeah.
not.
Nice, nice. Well, Kaylina, where would you like to start this discussion? Do you want to start off with a little bit of background of your story with travel, and kind of how what got you interested in it? Do you think that's a good place to start?
Oh, Reed, it's such a long story.
Yeah.
It's such a long story. Where to begin?
When I was
Reed, I
growing
am
up in my
33
adult
years old.
childhood.
I am 33 years old, and I just got back from a month in Peru. But that is not the first time I have been abroad for more than weeks.
Right. Right. Okay,
So,
so and thank you for the reminder. Let me give you a better question. Kaylina, in 2 minutes, summarize what got you interested in travel in the first place, and then give us some of the highlights over the last, I don't know, X number of years where you think that has had a big impact on your view on travel. How's that?
so as a child, I didn't really travel. Um, I started experiencing travel through school trips, and one of them was to Canada. Well, two of them were to Canada. Um, that
Is that also upstate New
it
York?
wasn't very. Oh yeah, I mean, I mean, we drove there in a bus, so you know. But I'm sure that the entire country of Canada would not be pleased with you right now.
You're welcome for the distraction. So you went to Canada as a kid with
So
school.
yeah, in high school, our language department brought us on two trips to Canada, and that wasn't like the thing. It just is part of the story, I guess. And to be honest, I haven't really like expressed this type of
Of course, that's what we're all about here.
connection. So my first trip to Europe was also in high school with the school, and that's really what did it for me. Other than that, I hadn't really traveled. Um, like my family went to Florida when I was 3 to Disney World, and then our family vacations were like to my grandparents' house in Cape May, New Jersey, and like local stuff. And then I did dance competitions in and around New York, Connecticut, New Jersey. So I never really like traveled far. Um, Actually, that's one. I had a friend that we were friends like in elementary school, and she moved to California, and we actually kept in touch. This was before the internet, um, so we must have like talked on the phone and written letters or something. So,
The
I mean, it was like elementary school, middle school, so I think like the internet was just starting. Um, but
dawn of
like
the internet.
we must have, I don't know, because we also must have had to pay long distance phone calls.
Yeah, isn't that
I
funny?
don't really know how we kept in touch, but somehow we did. And I ended up the summer before freshman year of high school, I flew to California by myself.
Wow,
Yeah,
impressive.
and that was actually before 9/11. So my layover was in Denver, and I have not since been back to Denver. But anyway, my layover was in Denver, and
Nice.
then, but my dad has a friend that lives there, and so for safety, they wanted to like he have him there on standby just in case, like I needed help or something because I was probably like 12.
Right.
um, I look back on this and I'm amazed that this even ever happened. Anyway, so I don't know if he came to the airport or not, but since it was before 9/11, he would have been allowed to come to the gate and meet me
Right.
because there wasn't like the crazy TSA security that there is now.
Mm-hmm. Travel has changed a little bit since then.
But that is my only memory of pre TSA flying. I guess that my trip to Europe was, yeah, my trip to Europe would have been after that.
Yeah. So you
Yeah.
so you
Oh,
d- you
anyway, so
took
I
the
went to
trip up.
California and I have
Yeah.
not since been back to California either.
Yeah.
For no particular reason, just other places were more interesting. So, anyway, I visited my friend in San Diego, and then I went to Seattle for spring break one year, um, because the friend that I was meeting was also another friend that had moved away, and then we got back in touch after years.
Your friends are good at
And
moving to the exact opposite side of the country.
yeah, and I don't know about you, and yeah, since I've known you, you've traveled all over the country in
I
an
know, right?
RV.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, didn't even mention that one
we
in the
never
intro.
we
Whoops.
never lived in the same place, but we met.
You're right, we did. So you traveled some of
So,
the stuff domestically and also went up to Canada. So you did
uh,
Canada and then you went internationally as well.
yes.
Where did you go
So
internationally?
so my trip to Europe was one of those tours that's like a whirlwind, and you go kind of all over the place in a period of like 12 days or something. So we landed in Ireland, and then we went across to Wales and England, and then we went to France. And excuse me. So the the other part of this story is language, and those international trips were with the language department in my school. And in my school, we had two choices: French or Spanish. And I chose French because my sister chose Spanish and I wanted to be different.
Nice.
But I have since learned Spanish, so that also still makes me different than my sister.
¿Por qué no los dos?
So in middle school, I started French, and I actually started to really enjoy it. And a friend of mine and I, we would like practice together, and we'd write notes back and forth in French, and like came up with random like weird things to say, like weird phrases that we would say to each other, and stuff like that. And so, uh, language was always kind of part of this journey. And so when I got to France, I fell in love with France, and it wasn't so much about traveling; it was about France. And so when I was picking out schools for college, I knew that I wanted to study abroad. So I picked a school. I didn't exactly know what I wanted to study or like what I wanted to be when I grow up, but I picked a school that had enough of my interests, so that it could be kind of open ended, and that I would also have the opportunity to study abroad. So originally, when I finally chose a major, I chose journalism with a minor in French and a minor in photography. And then after taking several journalism classes, I kind of got bored with that, and they all kind of felt the same. And I kind of came alive in the dark room. Um, and I think we talked about that last time, actually. So between that and then studying abroad in France and the credits that I came into college with, I ended up shifting that. So I double majored with French and photography and minored in journalism. And that's relevant because I did a considerable amount of international travel during college. So I studied abroad in Paris for a semester and did weekend trips and all of that, and became fluent in French. And um, did a month in Rome for a photography class. I was supposed to have gone to Madagascar, but there was some kind of political uprising and they canceled it at the last minute. So I did Rome instead, which, like, I mean, okay, too bad for you. You went to Rome instead of,
Not too
but,
bad. Not too
but,
bad.
I was kind of disappointed because that Madagascar thing was something that I had chosen the school for. But, you
Mm,
know, It was a little disappointing, and I have not yet been
So
there,
Madagascar
but
is on the list still.
eventually, I mean, and I want to go everywhere, so you know. But so yeah, then after my college had an agreement with the Burgundy School of Business in Dijon, France, and they did like a lottery every year to send some of our students over there for like a 2 week trip, and you got to be in it to win it. So I put my name in, and I ended up getting selected in the lottery. And so, like a couple days after graduation, I flew back to France and then was on that school trip. And then I stayed for a couple extra weeks because I had already at that point known that I was going to be going back to France at the for the coming school year to teach English. So then I decided to stay and uh, go around a little bit more in different places, and then I moved to France again. And after a year, well, like a school year, 9 months ish, my I tried to find more work, but it didn't work, and so I moved back because I did not want to become an illegal immigrant. And
Not this time.
no, and so I came back to the States and then did not travel until 2019. Well, I traveled a little bit domestically, uh, mostly related to an organization called HOBY, Hugh O'Brien Youth Leadership. It's an organization that I volunteer with that teaches leadership skills and volunteerism and community service and things like that to high school students. And so I traveled around to Texas for a seminar uh, and to St. Louis to volunteer. And I have friends in DC, so I've been there quite a bit. But so anyway, I mostly traveled domestically and mostly for financial reasons. Trying to build a photography business meant that income was not a lot for a while. And so, uh, so
What
yeah,
do you
so
mean? You
then in
said
2019,
photography and journalism and French. I mean, I think those are three of the highest netting, easiest job generating things to have. What are you talking about? Art and journalism, those are things people highly respect and are willing to pay lots of money for all the time, right?
when I graduated, they were like starting to fire photographers from newspapers and give iPhones to journalists.
Yes, because that's the same. Tangent. We'll leave that one there. We'll let that one rest. Okay, so all right, so you started out domestically. You had some
So yeah,
travel that was connected to school. Then you had some friends that you went and you saw, and some cross country trips, even at a pretty young age. And you also got a little bit of a glimpse of how travel can be different based on the security enabled, and how that can even change the feel of travel and things like that. Interesting
oh yeah,
thing about.
I could talk about that again, the security thing about Peru. I
Oh,
can
nice, interesting. We'll
mostly
leave.
coming home, but
Yeah, let's leave that one as a story for now. And then you did some more intensive travel over abroad, and you lived in France. Is that what you said?
yeah, twice.
And how long were each of those? Just roughly.
Semester in Paris, 9 months in Saint Etienne.
Okay, so you spent essentially a year and a half plus in France over kind of two separate times, and during that time also did some exploration to some other European countries and almost Madagascar, but not quite. So that one's on the
Right.
list. So you
Yeah.
have, and then
And
now you came back and you 2019 you were mentioning
so
you.
in 2019, I had gotten out of a relationship and then just realized I hadn't been anywhere in a long time and that it had been like 10 plus years since I've been to France and I needed to get back, or maybe it was like 8 years, something like that. And so I decided to go to France, and I found actually pretty cheap tickets to get there. And since I know a lot of people, I only had to pay for lodging for like half of my trip, which
Oh,
was pretty
nice.
great. I rented a car and pretty much drove around the entire country. But the country of France is not that large, so it's not as intense as like you driving around all of the United States. So it's probably like driving around Texas.
I didn't even know about that one now.
Yeah, it's
Everything's
probably
bigger
like
in
driving around New
Texas.
York. But it was still pretty intense. It was like
For sure.
11, 12 days, and I drove uh, from Paris all the way down the western coast and then across to Saint Etienne from like the southwestern corner and then back up to Paris. So pretty much I made a loop across the whole country. Um,
Yeah, and France is pretty big too. As it's one of the larger
I
geographically, at least
think
as
you
far as
fit
Europe
five
countries
of
go.
France and Texas, actually.
What'd you say?
I think five of France fits in Texas.
I don't think it's that big. I have a picture I'll show later. I just pulled up a Google search, but
Well, yeah, but when I was teaching, I looked up this information.
oh, okay, all right. Maybe you know more than I do.
Uh, but anyway, so yeah, I did that, and then the pandemic hit, and so then that kind of put a kibosh on travel for a little while. But then I met some friends on an app to practice Spanish, and that led me to Colombia last summer, my first time south of the border. And then in December, I went to Hawaii for 3 weeks. And to respond to your like intro thing about traveling being healing, that trip to Hawaii was much about that.
Yeah.
The I think the 2019 trip to France also was too. Funny though, I met someone on one of my recent trips. I think it was in Hawaii. I was talking to someone in the hostel maybe, and they were like, "You're traveling alone. Did you recently go through a breakup?" Like, I mean, not really, but so and so anyway, I just got back from a month in Peru.
Nice. Well, I think
So
that was
that's
yeah. No,
more
thank
than
you.
2 minutes summary.
Oh, I knew what I was getting myself into. Let's be real. But you aim small and then you get a little bigger, and that's okay. Um,
Oh, yeah, like my Toastmaster speech last night,
nice, nice.
which was supposed to be 5 to 7 minutes about my trip to Peru, but was like 10 minutes and 50 seconds.
Hey, well, it's something you're passionate about, and it's fresh on the brain. So I'm sure it was even hard keeping it to that length.
Uh, yeah, it was rough.
So, okay, so we went through kind of the history of travel. We talked about there were a handful of different types. One was travel you were doing with school, presumably maybe in a large group of students that were in a similar situation as you were. Some in high school, some and then later in university. You had some travel that you've done independently to go visit friends. Some as when you were young, as I don't know, 10 or 12, it sounded like, and then some that you've done in recent years. And then you've had some travel that's been a little more exploratory, if you will. It sounds like when you went to Colombia and Peru and Hawaii, these were maybe some places you've never been before, and you're, I don't know, looking for adventure or something like that. And then you had kind of the what I'll call extended travel when you were living in France, and living outside of the U.S., living outside of your normal place that you were living in the U.S. And at some point it's like, well, is that still travel? And I
Oh,
don't know the
yes.
answer to that, but I think it totally is, because it's a temporary place and you're just spending more time there. And then also, as you
Well,
mentioned,
not
as
only
you were there,
that,
you were
yeah,
traveling within that area too, right? Um,
right.
so if when it comes to this nice robust travel history you've given us, like if you had to say now, like what is travel to you? Like why do you travel?
Yeah, I'm really still because I had such a gap between when I during the time when I've been building my career. Um, I'm actually just starting to really discover what it means to me now as like an actual adult.
Yeah.
Because before, I mean, I was scarcely a teenager when I began, and then scarcely out of my teenage years at the end of that. So I was looking for different things, I think, at that time. Um, so, and then each of my trips in my recent years has kind of had a different motivation.
Yeah.
So, like the trip to France was to reconnect with with part of me after getting out of a relationship that had become toxic, and um, to kind of to re-inspire that connection with travel and with France itself, and to speak French again because I hadn't really had much opportunity to do that for a long time. And then the trip to Colombia was very much about visiting people that and I mean a little bit about seeing Colombia, but I really did not see that much. And so when people are like, "Oh, what's Colombia like?" I'm like, you know, I don't really know that much.
Well,
Spent
maybe
a lot of time with my friends and not out exploring on my own. So,
right.
um,
But on that trip, somewhat similarly, maybe to parts of your France trips, you experienced the culture with some people who were living there, which is also an experience that a lot of people
yeah,
don't get when they're traveling.
that's true. And honestly, like that became a big part of my trip in Peru too. Um, I mean, I didn't know people there before I went, but that was a part of my objective when I was traveling to Peru was to meet locals and experience what that's like, not
Yeah,
just
so
be a
so now
tourist.
that you are, in your words, more of a real adult or whatever, you've lived some, you've been some places, you've seen some things, you've
I'm in
experienced
my
some.
third decade of life.
Yes. Yeah. You've experienced some heartache. You're working on building a business, all these types of things. When it comes to travel now,
I've
and
had
especially,
COVID.
yeah, I had COVID. It's kind of like a passport stamp. Did that, did that.
Yeah,
uh,
I'm vaccinated and I have natural immunity now. Thank you.
hey, nice. I saw a little, hair flip emoji going on there. I like that. But now, especially coming fresh off a trip for Peru, as you're looking forward as to what may be next. I mean, do you have one? I guess is there something on your mind for that next thing? I guess let's start with that one.
Well, uh, replenishing my bank account.
Yeah.
But so originally I had planned to go to Estonia this summer to a yoga retreat because I know the woman that runs it, and then there was talk of maybe going to Iceland. Well, originally I had an idea maybe I would go to Russia since it's like right by Estonia.
Right.
Um,
I'm sure those
but
plans
but
didn't change at all with the war.
that you know that was before everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that's clearly not happening. Um, and it's debatable whether the Europe trip will really happen because of finances. So, yes, my dollars went much further in Peru than they go in the United States, especially with hyperinflation. Um, but uh, it still costs kind of a lot to go somewhere for a month. So I definitely need to replenish the finances, and I have a lot of weddings and stuff booked for the next 6 months. But well, I haven't said this in public, but tentatively, I want to move to Buenos Aires
Oh,
um,
exciting.
in like early next year.
Well, that's cool.
It's
So, okay,
tentative. There's a lot of things that have to go right for that to happen.
sure. Okay,
But
well,
but
that's a
based on
that's a
my
big jump.
experiences living in France, um, So wait, let me take a couple steps back. So one of my goals in life is to be a polyglot,
Okay.
and speak as many languages as I can, as well as I can. And so I decided that goal right before the pandemic happened. And since I already knew French and I already knew a little bit of Spanish, I decided to go with Spanish as the next one to get good at. And so that's where I like got that app to practice with natives, and because I already knew like the basic structure. And so I from learning French, I have a template for like the different levels that I can be at in learning a language. So I knew that basically what I needed to do was just practice a ton,
Right.
um, and like in every way possible. And so, but then there was a pandemic, so I couldn't really like,
Hmm.
I couldn't really find a group, like in real life. I couldn't found, be a founder of a group to do that. So Um, I found an app, and I didn't create the app. I located an app to practice with native speakers, in which I found two friends that became um, like people that I communicated with on a regular basis. And then once I started going back out in the world, I would just speak Spanish with anybody that seemed like they spoke Spanish. Which, like half the population of my small city are immigrants that speak Spanish, so it's not
Oh,
that
nice.
hard to find people. Um, and then also in a lot of the weddings that I was doing, which were actually Hasidic Jewish weddings, ultra Orthodox Jewish. But a lot of the people that worked at the venues, I would work at the same venues routinely, and a lot of the people were immigrants that spoke Spanish, and so I would talk to them in Spanish. And then like the local bodega on the corner,
Right.
and
So
whatever.
you've gotten a lot of
So
practice in with Spanish, and so you're
so
looking
anyway,
to.
then I went. So part of the impetus for Peru was uh, like in addition to Colombia, was knowing that I wanted to spend a longer amount of time in a Spanish speaking country, because I can feel where I'm at with the language was that I need immersion, and that's what's going to be the difference, because I'm at the place that I was at with French when I went to France, and it was immersion that brought me to the next level of actually being functional in the language. um, there's just something about being in a place where you're forced to use it for everyday communication that it just changes how you see the language. And you go from needing to conjugate verbs to seeing each individual conjugation as a word,
Mm.
and you don't think about what conjugation, like you don't think, okay, I will go to the store later. You don't like think
You
that
can't. You
way.
don't. Yeah, you're not building this sentence in your head, if you will,
Right.
every single time.
Um, and then the other thing is learning vocabulary via like seeing words everywhere, and then asking people and learning how to describe what the word is that you want to say when you don't know what it is.
Mm, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then them telling you what the word is, and then you like repeat exposure and things like that. And so I just knew that that's like the stage that I was at, and so I wanted to spend a longer amount of time.
Yeah.
And so like I had said before, language has always been kind of a part of this travel journey.
Nice.
I don't know what else I was talking about, but
Oh, that's
that's
all right. That's okay. So, um,
I don't remember what started that train of thought.
no worries at all. I was talking about when you're looking at what's next, and you mentioned
Oh yeah.
that you were wanting to potentially move to Buenos Aires next
Oh
year.
right. Oh yeah.
Um,
So it's because I know that I want to see a lot of South America, and I know from experience that in the living in the place that you want to travel around is makes it much easier.
yeah, yeah. I've said
Um,
for years I really want to go to Europe and stay for a few months, to kind of do similarly to like what you're doing in France, because I want to go live there and then, take trains and planes and buses and explore the areas nearby, because a weekend trip here from Dallas, is it takes you 3-4 hours just to get out of the state, and I'm somewhat near the edges. Whereas when you're in Europe or South America or something, that weekend trip can take you all sorts of other places that
Oh
you've also
yeah,
never been and can be
yeah,
drastically different, right?
yeah. It's funny because some people are like, oh, like since I've been on this app, I've talked to other people, not just my friends from Colombia, and they're like, "Oh, where have you been in Europe?" And I'm like, "You want me to list all of the countries that I went to?" Like, really? We might be here a while. Like, and I don't mean that in a cocky way, but like, I'm lucky. I've, I mean, I've gone over to the continent of Europe, like, I don't know, probably more than 5 times,
Right.
right? And
And
a
some of
couple
those
of
were for
those times
months at a
I
time, right?
spent months over there, right? So once you're there, it's really easy to get around.
Yeah. Well, so let's take a step back for a second and let's
So
talk
anyway, I want
about.
to be able to repeat that in South America.
Yeah, yeah, please. Um, and I'm looking forward to that, and I want to come visit. So hurry up and get down there already, would you?
Uh-huh. Well, if you want to be my sponsor.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so let's take a step back and let's talk about the different. Let's talk about the speed of travel, right? So there's one thing
Oh
to
boy.
go somewhere and spend like a day or even just part of a day there, right? Another thing
Hmm.
is to go for a weekend, or if you do something kind of like a Euro trip, a classic, what Americans often think of as a Euro trip, which is where you go to Europe for 7 to 14 days and you're going from place to place to place, kind of like you said earlier, a whirlwind travel. And then you have the pace where you're spending, I would say, a week or more in the same place, and that's kind of like another level. And then there's where you're staying there for a month plus, and you're trying to really live somewhere. And you've kind of done a handful of those, if not all
I
of
think
those.
I've done all of them.
Yeah, as I say, I think you've done all of those. So before I ask any other more narrow question on that, what are your thoughts on the pace of travel? I mean, should you try and do all of them? Should you do one of them, or do you have a favorite? What are your thoughts on
Should you do all of them? Yes, you should do all of them.
it?
That's like saying, should you travel? Yes. Yes, of course. You should travel. Um, it changes your perspective on life. So, of course. Um, let's see. I mean, each one has kind of their benefits, their advantages and their disadvantages. Um, the reason that I'm saying I want to move to Buenos Aires is because it's, I mean, I think it's a lot of things, but it's because I want to be able to have a slower pace.
and
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 with
and is that with
within
travel
that
or
slower,
life?
well, I don't know, both, but it's I want to have a slower pace of travel so I can be more immersed in the experience, but also uh, there will still be some of those faster things within that, I'm sure, because like when I was in Europe, I was living in France, so I had the more slow immersion experience in France, in the place where I was living at the time. But then, you take like a weekend trip to, um, you know, I took a, I took like a 2 day trip to Amsterdam, right? Or like a 1 day trip to, somewhere else in France or whatever. On the spring break from when I was teaching, I had, I think, 11 or 12-day trip in which I visited like 3 cities in Italy, and then Budapest, Prague, and Warsaw. And then I went back to Paris, and then I went back to Saint Etienne. So Oh, and I visited a couple places in the south of France also on the trip. So like there's both, you know,
Right.
when you're living there, it just facilitates you to be able to do more in the region that you're in.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so in a way, by moving there, or at least by going to do slow travel there, you're enabling yourself to kind of get the benefits of all of the different types of travel, and adding in one of the most valuable things, in my opinion, with travel, which is flexibility, and the ability to say, "Oh, you know what? I just heard about this cool thing. Like, I want to go check that out," or hey, these
or the
people are
weather
going.
is bad, let me do something else.
Right. Yeah. Or hey, there's people here who are going to do this activity or go to this place. And regardless of whether or not I had plans to go do that, like they're going now, and I think it would be cool to go experience it with them. You know, having the ability to have a little bit of that flexibility, I think makes a world of difference. And that
Oh
kind of
yeah.
like
Like
I was
I can
talking
talk
about
about
with
that
the
too with
yeah, go for it.
Hawaii. Yeah, so I just joined a bunch of Facebook groups about Hawaii, partly to promote my art in them, but also I can be a resource about Hawaii since I spent 3 weeks there. I mean, obviously I don't know everything, and I still have a little bit of trouble with the names of places, but I do have some knowledge based on my experience. And so somebody was asking about island hopping, and they were like wondering if they should book it ahead and like how to do it and this and that. And I wrote about how my experience was basically that I booked everything at the last minute. And um, because I was so flexible, it was like the reason for where I was going, when I was going there was like partially based on following weather patterns, and then also about the availability of lodging and car rentals. And like the airline I flew with was Southwest, because you could change your flight up until like a couple of hours before for free. And I took advantage of that multiple times.
Yeah.
And it was like, because I wasn't so like stuck on an itinerary, I could change it like at the last minute basically, and I did multiple times. And like part of it was even just things like it was going to be raining the entire time I would be on this island if I kept that itinerary, and like that would defeat the point of being in
Right.
Hawaii. So, I'm like, okay, well, I don't really want to go to Kauai where I the only activity that I have planned is hiking, um, if it's going to be pouring rain those days. So let me go to Maui instead. Um, or like I'll go to Kauai these days because there's one place that I can stay, that I can kind of afford to stay. And it's available these days, so I guess that's when I'm going. you know?
Nice.
So anyway, my advice was like, well, I don't know if it's advice, but it was just that like the benefit was that I was able to be super flexible, and like the impetus for they asked me some follow-up question. I was like, as I said, my impetus for when I went places was based on the weather and availability of lodging. So, but
Yeah.
but then
There's
but
certain.
then like in Peru, I had a much more um it was much more fixed, my itinerary, because I had certain things that were on certain dates that I had to be like. My Inca Trail trek was on a specific date, booked well in advance, and had to be that way. And so I like definitely had to be in Cusco by that date, for example. So it was way more planned.
Yeah. So there's definitely benefits to having both the, you know, if you have things planned out in advance, and also depending on the type of person you are, right? Like some people I know may be on the edge of their seats, like you book things last minute, like how did you do that? Like all like on edge and nervous. Like what if I don't get there? What if I can't do this? What if I do this? Like so if you're like hyper stressed and hyper anxious and hyper tightly wound, like know
Well, then you should
thyself.
definitely do that. You should definitely do that then, because it forces you to have to be like get comfortable with last minute changes.
Yeah, no, and I could again, what is the value of travel? Well, one of them can be, hey, let me try these things and experience them and find out, like, hey, is it going to be horrible and the entire world's going to come raining down, and or is it going to be okay? And then regardless of how that goes, you learn something, you live a little. But there, for me and Danielle, especially as we did the RV, which was about as flexible as you can get because we could drive basically wherever we wanted. Our lodging traveled with us. We did have to find a place to park it, but that was not that strong of a restriction. And then also we had the ability to fly as well. Like, hey, we're gonna fly, and not just fly, but we could fly out of pretty much whatever airport we wanted. And we didn't do that a ton, but we did do that a couple of times. But the nice thing is the schedule was super hyper flexible. However, I'll caution people, and of course, you can travel however you like, and I encourage you to travel in whatever way you like, and let us know what you think. But for us, we found that there is a good balance of having at least a couple of, I'll call them tent poles, like if you think of like a traditional circus tent, you got these big tent poles that kind of hold up the overall tent, but it kind of flows other than that. And so by having a couple of anchors, like, hey, all right, we're going to be in this city, on this day for this activity, and this city on that day for this activity, but we're not going to plan the stuff in between. We'll just kind of, meander and figure our way there. So that's kind of what we did, and we found that was kind of a good balance. Give you some bounds, kind of similar to art. Like, if you can do whatever, make whatever, like that's great. But sometimes it's good to have a couple of bounds and a little bit of structure to help you be creative within.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so we found that it was good for us to have a little bit of waypoints, if you will, but having the flexibility and ability for things to change. And like as you mentioned, there's a lot of things you can't control. One of those is weather, and another of those is maybe there's certain events that are going on at certain times. And one of the most pleasant things for Danielle and me was some of the serendipitous things that happen. It's like, oh, we happened to be in this city when this thing was going on, or oh, well, we didn't plan it that well, and we got really lucky with our weather and with our timing, but we happened to be at the top of this mountain when the sunset was right when the sunset was starting. And I don't know if we planned it this well. I don't think we could have done it this well. So it was kind of like there were definitely times where we really enjoyed and benefited some of that serendipitous stuff. And also, that was kind of even amped up by the fact, like, hey, knowing that I didn't intentionally plan this and it just kind of happened this way made it that much more pleasant, because there is a cost to the planning aspect as well, especially if you have a plan, you make a plan, and then things don't go to plan, because that's stressful for people, and can make you uneasy. It's like,
Yeah,
hey, but we were supposed to
I
do this, we
feel
were
like
supposed to go
that's a
this, right?
little bit more stressful than like doing things at the last minute sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So yeah, so that's a little bit about flexibility when it comes to travel. Um, so let's briefly talk. So I'm going to throw out a couple of things, and then I want you to kind of pick one that you would maybe want to chat about, and then we'll move over to your pictures. Um, so one is the cost of travel. Another is traveling alone, and then another one is, yeah. Let's stick with yeah. Let's stick with those two. Which one of those would you like to talk about? The cost of travel, or the traveling alone?
I guess traveling alone.
Okay, so when it comes to traveling alone, especially as a woman, and a white woman going into Latin America, where there are lighter skinned people, but they're definitely the minority. What what was that intimidating for you? Like, is that something you did with full confidence, like going in, or you'd mentioned you'd done some travel in the past alone, but it sounded like that was largely to places where you could blend in a little bit better, and it may not have been as big of a deal that you were traveling alone. So going into this trip, or the trip down to Colombia, what were some of your thoughts as you were going to travel alone?
Okay, well, I have a history of traveling alone. Um, when I was in Europe, the majority of my travel was alone. actually. And uh, I don't know. I didn't really think much about it. There was like a couple of times I was in like somewhat sketchy situations, like mostly because of a language barrier. Like when I took a Russian train overnight from Prague to Warsaw, that was a little sketchy. Um, Mostly because I couldn't communicate very well with people and I'd never been on an overnight train before.
Hmm.
And the train was going past Warsaw. And so I was just a little bit like, what if I miss my stop? And, things like that. But I mean, I survived and didn't have any issues. Um, and the other time, like I had my overnight bus from Amsterdam to Paris, and that that was a whole saga, which I'm not going to tell now because it's going to take up a long time. But basically, I missed the bus and I had to catch up with it some other place in the Netherlands, and um, it was terrifying actually. So um, I learned in that from that experience that you're never really late unless you're never really lost unless you have a deadline. Uh, but so basically, I missed the bus, but I ended up catching up with it. But they didn't want to let me on. And in the train station, when I had to buy a train ticket, they didn't want to let me use a credit card. And I don't speak Dutch. um, it was complicated. Anyway, I did manage to eventually get back to Paris and survive, but that was a scary experience traveling alone, and I was probably 19 or
Yeah.
something. And it was before smartphones were a thing, or at least before they were like as common now. So I was traveling with paper maps, like the tourist maps that you'd get you'd
Right.
have to like the first stop when you get to a city is to the tourist information center, where you pick up the map of the city that tells you where you should see things.
Which I will input real quickly. Like,
Which we don't do
I
anymore.
well, I will actually encourage people. Like, I feel like people overly rely on their devices these days and on the internet, and there's certainly a wealth of information and knowledge to be had there. And I'm not saying don't use those things, but whether it be travel or really anything else, don't underestimate the power of talking to somebody who is essentially an expert in that area, and don't underestimate the value of being a human, talking to a human who can help customize the information directly to you. And so going to a place like this, or even within the airport, oftentimes there are volunteers there who are there to help people figure out where they're going within the airport and maybe even within the city. So don't underestimate the value of just going and talking to them and saying, hey, I'm looking for a place to go eat that's not too expensive, but gives me a taste of the local flavor,
I actually
or
have a story about this
oh,
from
nice.
Peru. Yeah.
Or hey, I'm considering going to this place or this place. Do you have any thoughts on it? And again, people are people, so don't have the highest of expectations. Like, just go in like, you know what? If I don't get anything valuable out of this, then okay, I'll move on. I can ask another person, or I can pull out my smartphone or whatever. But um, you know, talking to someone whose job it is to provide information to tourists, like, of course, like, they're gonna know some information. And don't be afraid to ask the tough questions, like, hey, is that place like really a good place, or are you guys just paid to say that? Or like, hey, I'm not looking for like the super touristy stuff, like I want something where it's like you would maybe enjoy going to. Like, you can ask these kind of more in-depth questions, but things that you wouldn't find from a top 10 list necessarily. So don't underestimate the value of that, whether it be in travel or anything else. Like, and that's something that I've known, but I've definitely learned in my entrepreneurial journey more and more over the last few years. Is like, man, if I could just talk to somebody who knows how to do this thing, I can get the answer so much quicker, faster, and I get a whole much breadth of information around that I never even realized I would think about or need. You don't know what you don't know. So talking to someone who knows what they're talking about, they'll give you a much more rich answer than just what you might find on your own. Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
what's your
so
story
two
on that?
things about
Or,
that. So don't underestimate the value of knowing the native language of the place that you're traveling to. for doing things like what you just said. That significantly improved my experience in Peru, being able to
Mm-hmm.
speak Spanish. So um, I had this destination that I wanted to visit, and I could have gone on a tour to get there, but I was kind of sick of going on tours and I wanted to figure out how to get around on my own. So I wanted to take the colectivo to get there. Basically, I think in different places, colectivo means different things. But I was in Cusco, and in Cusco, the colectivo is basically just the bus. But the bus is not centrally organized like here in the United States, where you could just log on to the city bus website and find a map and see all the different bus lines and go on Google Maps and type in your destination and your origin, and it will tell you what bus to take and where the bus stop is and what time it's going to come. No, it's not like that at all. You basically just have to know. And each of the buses lines are different bus companies and have their own like distinct looking buses. And there's not like one central place to find the information about the bus lines. So you pretty much have to just know or be able to ask people. And it's pretty disorganized and like uncentralized. And I was walking around going like I want to kind of just take a random bus and see where I wind up, but also I was a little bit nervous about doing that. So and I also had a couple places I was like trying to actually go. And so I was walking down the street and somebody from one of the tourist companies, they approached me about something. I mean, this is a pretty common occurrence because they're all just trying to get customers, right? So um at first I just kind of shoot them away because I was like, whatever, like I don't need to go to whatever thing that you're trying to sell me. But then I was like, actually, no, I'm going to go talk to you because I want to try to get to this place, but I want to take the bus to get there. So I went and I talked to him. I was like, so I'm trying to get to this place and I want to take the bus there. How do I do that? And he like walked me over to the bus stop and explained, okay, so you're going to take this bus and you're going to take it all the way to the end. And then you're going to get off and you're going to take a cab to get to the place. And I was like, it was a little bit overwhelming,
Yeah.
to be honest. But then, and he's like, let me just make sure. And so he like called someone at his company to double check. And then when the bus finally arrived, basically, unless you have taken this bus a lot, you pretty much just need to check with the people on the bus that the bus is going to where you're trying to get to. So then you get on the bus and it's like, there's a driver and then there's a person that collects the money and announces the stops. And you have to say like bajo, which means like I'm getting off. And it's pretty chaotic. Also, you have to make sure that you have cash. Um, you don't have to have exact change because they'll give you change, but you should probably have smaller bills and coins. It was like one sole or two soles to go
Yeah.
on the bus. Um, anyway, I did it a couple of times and I survived. It was my way of trying to have an authentic experience.
Nice. Yeah. So the value of being able to chat with somebody and get the information from them helped you get where you were gonna go and feel a little bit more confident about it. And I want to make sure to emphasize like they're like having the language and knowing the language certainly can help, but by no means would I say that it's a requirement for travel. I know with
Oh
my
no, I'm not
travel.
saying it's a requirement, but it definitely enhances your experience.
Sure, sure, absolutely. But I also want to just point out, like, whenever we were traveling through Latin America, through South America, we came across many people who knew not a lick of Spanish before they started their trip, or they, had learned like the very, very basic, like, introductory phrases and like, where's the bathroom type of thing. And they get along just fine, which is another thing I really like to point out. Um, for sure in Latin America, but really across a lot of countries, I would say, which is that there is, especially for these big, highly traveled areas, there's like the areas where the tourists typically go. And because of that, there are um, hotels and hostels and restaurants and tour agencies and all this type of stuff that are aimed at providing the tourist with a good experience. And so near those areas, like you're gonna find more safety and ability to find information, ability to book things. You also may find some things are more expensive because they're catering towards tourists versus local. It's the kind of thing where uh, you may go buy a beer from this place that they're good at talking English and understanding stuff like that. But then you go 2 blocks over and the beer is a quarter of the price or whatever, because that's like where the locals would go.
Mm.
So, there's plenty of
Yeah, I
safe
would.
areas. And then also, if you're traveling places where a lot of people travel, there are usually a lot of English speaking people who are also traveling that area. And that's also where a huge depth of information and knowledge came from. Um, we had a lot of our stuff planned out before we went, but talking with people was a really great way of deciding, like, hey, we really want to do that, or maybe we'll not do that, or maybe we'll jump in with you guys for this thing. Because there are a lot of people who are like, oh, well, I just went and did that. Make sure you check this place out, or don't do that, or whatever. And you get a whole bunch of those small tips by having
Oh
those
yeah,
discussions with people who either just went there or are about to go there, and they can tell you about their research from it and things like that.
yeah.
So a lot of
That's
value
the
talking
thing.
to other people who are
Travelers,
traveling as well.
travelers are very like you're gonna spend a lot of time talking about your travel plans because that's what you know that's what you know how to talk about when you're talking to people you don't know. So,
Yeah,
and they're traveling too, and it's just the natural place to start. And so, yeah, definitely for sure do
yeah.
that a lot,
So okay,
especially
so
in hostels. Everyone's always like, "Oh, what are you doing tomorrow?"
right, right,
You know, "What did you do today? Do you want to
yeah.
go grab a drink?" Or, you have a drink already because you're in the hostel and you brought some.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So last question, and then we're gonna move over to your pictures. Is so what do you think makes travel potentially life changing? What makes travel so powerful?
well, that's a good question.
Yeah,
That's a good, I don't know. I don't know. The first thing that came to mind was like novelty, but uh, I mean, basically, you can see how other people live, and you realize that we're all the same, and so it can enhance your empathy. But then also seeing, so this is a something that's different about my travel now versus when I was younger is I'm much more into seeing nature now, and going to places that are crazy in the world, like not man-made crazy, natural crazy. And it wasn't that I wasn't into it, it's just like it didn't occur to me as much to go to places like that. I was much more into like, let me see the city, and sometimes I only had like a day or something in a city, so I wasn't going to take an excursion for 3 hours to get to like a mountain or something. Like it just wasn't part of what I was experiencing. But now it's definitely a more important part of my travel experience is going to these remote places. And um, I mean, it's just it encourages a sense of awe,
yeah,
and yeah, it's it can be a spiritual experience as well. Like Hawaii for me was a very spiritual experience, and there was a lot of like it was just otherworldly. So seeing like the otherworldly type places and just the scope of the scale of the world, and The beauty of the planet is pretty incredible, but then also being able to connect with people that have a completely different life experience from you, but realize that you're all the same, that like we all kind of want the same things, even if we think we want different things. It's we really all want to be connected and live a good life and have food on the table and like it's basic but it encourages more empathy and understanding and um, things like that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And a couple of things to riff off of there. For me, that sense of awe, that sense of wonder, that sense of amazement, that's a huge part for me when it comes to travel. And natural beauty, I think, is definitely a big part of it. 100% is a big part of it for me, because it also gives you a little bit of perspective too. And one, it's easy to forget just how freaking big this world is, especially in this day and age where you can watch a internet show and be transported across the world through pictures and story, um, so easily. Or you could be FaceTiming with somebody who's literally in all the way across the world. So it makes the world feel smaller through the internet and pictures and video and things like that. But when you're there, especially when you're seeing these massive, mountains or beaches or valleys or whatever it may be, it helps you have a little bit of sense of scale of, okay, wow, these things are big in and of themselves. And in the case of Peru, it's like you were, I don't know, 3,000 miles or whatever away from, you were basically on the other side of the world, right? And it's a completely different experience. But also one of the cool things, as you're mentioning, is even though it is a different part of the world and it's so far away, like you're meeting people, and you're meeting people from all over, which again is another one of the big parts for me, is talking with people who are both local and who traveled there, and getting to know them and learning about them and interacting with people who you would never talk with otherwise. And also sometimes, especially when you're in a place where foreigners stick out, like for example in Peru, if you see white people walking around, like there's a good chance that they're not from that area, right? And so you also have some of these conversations with people who may be completely different from a completely walk of life than you, but you talk to each other because you're both there. And it's like, oh, what are you doing here, and where are you going next, and all that kind of stuff, and how's your trip going? So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you on the empathy side of things. I'll also say, like, just having a change of environment is extremely valuable and inspirational. Which especially coming off of a pandemic where everyone's been so localized in their living, travel, I think, is some of the best medicine. And I always find myself feeling very rejuvenated and full of ideas and inspiration and hope whenever I come back from travel. And lately, lately I've realized, I was like, all right, I need to book something because, yeah, I start to lose some of that juice if it's been a while. Um, so yeah, those are all great points.
Yeah, I mean, I think I get a little bit of a depression when I come back.
Yeah.
Traveling makes me feel alive, and especially when I'm in a different culture and I can find my way. And then, like, if I'm in a different culture and I can navigate and communicate with people in their language, there's just a different part of me that's lit up, and I feel more myself and more confident and more alive. And then also in Peru, uh, I had a lot of I did a lot of trekking, and it was a lot about like conquering my fears. And like I like hiking partially for seeing the views, but also because it makes me feel alive, because
Mm-hmm.
I have to face my mortality, because I get literally afraid of dying in some places. Like literally I'm afraid I might fall over the edge and die. So it's like nothing makes you feel more alive than being afraid you're going to die. And like sitting at home in your comfortable apartment is like, you know, that it doesn't make you face being alive in the same way, you know.
Right. Right. And it's
um,
also
and
so
then
easy when you're at home, whether it's in your comfy chair or at the office or wherever doing work, and you're focused on grinding and making the money and doing these things, and it's like, well, what's the point of it all, right? And
mm,
why are we doing these things? And it's so easy to get caught on that wheel of like, well, I'm just trying to make some money to survive. And so that's another nice thing about travel is, one, it helps you see how much the value of money can change based on where you're going and where you're traveling. Uh,
God.
and yeah, and that's one thing about Latin America I really love is the dollar goes so much farther there. But two, it also exposes
Yes.
you to different ways that people look at money. I remember, talking to some people who were like, "Yeah, I bought a one-way ticket here, and I'm gonna travel until my money runs out." And then, like, depending on who you are, and depending on who they were, it's like sometimes it was like, I've got like 3-4 grand, and we'll see where that goes. And some people are like, I got like 10 grand, but that's like the largest number I heard, which is like, and those were people were like, and I'm gonna be here. I've been here for 3 months, and I'm hoping to make here another year or something like that. And you get into these situations where it's like, hey, if I go to this hostel and I just work there a few days a week, where working there is like checking people in and maybe tidying up the kitchen or whatever, then I can stay there for free. And so it's actually not costing me anything besides, oh, and I get breakfast as well. So the only cost to me is a couple of meals a day. And if I want to go and explore and do some other things, it's like, well, actually, I can bring my expenses down very low, and my money can go really far. But we've gotten conditioned in this society, especially in America, where it's like, and especially as house prices go up and rent goes up, it's like, man, it's like, a lot of people are paying 3 grand plus a month just to survive and just to have a roof over their heads, right? And it's like 3 grand a month if you were to just sell all your stuff and get rid of your ties and just go travel. And like 3 grand a month
Yeah,
would
that's my
allow you to
what I'm
do.
trying to do. That's what
Right,
I'm
would let you do all sorts of things. And Buenos Aires is
yeah.
an example I hear all the time, where it's like, if you had that kind of budget in Buenos Aires, is like you could have a maid, you could get massages every day, you could go to really nice restaurants, and like, of course, the the point is that it's easy to get fixated on where you are and how you see the world and how things are. And going to travel and experience other cultures also helps you remember, like, hey, there are people outside of this country, and there are people who don't think about
Oh,
us and don't care about us, and all that kind of aspect as
and
well, right?
also like just the way that we're accustomed to living. Like, so the Toastmaster speech that I gave last night, the beginning of it was toilet seats, clean drinking water in public, and predictable and reliable public transportation. These are a few things that I will never again take for granted after spending a month in Peru.
Yeah, yeah,
And on that list, I could have put like heated buildings.
yeah. And I
Um,
want I want to make sure to point
so,
out for the travelers who that turns off of Peru, like, don't worry, there's other parts, and there
oh, don't
if you
worry, there
have
are toilet seats, but it's just inconsistent. It's just
and also, like, hey, if you want to, like, have that more gilded life, and you want to have that higher standard, like, that stuff is totally findable, right? If you have the money, like, that stuff exists. So I want to make sure that
oh
people
yeah,
don't get
I just
afraid
wanted
of
to
that.
have an authentic experience and know like what is Peru really like, not what is Peru like for tourists.
Right.
And of course, I did plenty of touristy things, and I went on a lot of tours, guided tours, and things like that. But it was really my like part of my mission to experience like what do people live like at all different levels here.
Hmm. Well, with that being said, I'm going to ask you to do one of the hardest things, which is, we're going to show some of your pictures and we're going to talk about them, but just very
And
briefly.
I'm just going to keep coughing from the
Eh,
remnants of COVID.
yeah, there you go. The remnants of COVID. That's a good band name. Um, but yeah, so we're gonna just briefly talk about these, and I know that each one of these pictures, which we didn't even talk about the aspect of photography with travel, which is also a huge part for me. But behind each one of these pictures is not just one story, but a lot of story and a lot of experience for you. So I recognize the difficulty in what I'm about to ask, but basically, I want us to just kind of scroll through the photos, and I want you to pick a couple for us to briefly talk about, and then that'll have to be it for today.
Okay.
And we might do something another day where we chat a little bit more in depth. Now, this link you shared with me, is this a public link that you'd like shared, or is this one that you would just like for me to just show on our screen?
It's not really public, no.
Okay, cool.
You can just
So
share it on your
cool.
screen.
So let me switch over here to this. All right. So here we have your pictures. So let me do a little bit of resizing here.
Now, obviously, I have like a way ton more pictures.
Right. So especially as a photographer, so I'm curious, what's the number of pictures taken on that trip? Do you know?
Let me see. I don't know.
I'm gonna guess like 10,000.
No, it was less. Peru. I think it was in the neighborhood of like 5 or 6,000.
Nice. 5 or 6,000.
Well, it was probably more like 7 because I also had phone pictures. So camera pictures were like probably 5 or 6,000, and then I probably took another like 1 or 2,000 on my phone.
Gotcha. All right. So here's your parameters. I'll start at the bottom, and I'm gonna scroll back up to the top. And I want you
Okay,
to.
so we're
We're
gonna
gonna
go
end
in
up picking.
reverse chronological order.
Well, I'm just scrolling so everyone can see here. I want you to pick 2 pictures that we're gonna talk about, and then we're gonna have to wrap it up for today. So let me know when you see
Don't make
one
me
that.
choose. You choose.
Okay. All right. I can choose one, for sure. So let's do. Let's start out with this one. I think this is a fun one. So what is this? I mean, this looks like it's out of a movie or a video game or something. What is this that we're looking at?
This is Wakachina. It's a literal oasis in the desert. This picture was taken at sunrise. I got up and left my hostel when it was dark out and climbed up a sand dune and took a picture. In Wakachina, I did sand dune buggying and sandboarding, and it was probably the best $20 I've ever spent. It was so much fun. Better than a roller coaster. There's a picture of me in the sand dune buggy too.
Nice. I think there's one more too, right? Nice. So what? Where? How do you spell
I don't know
this?
what else to say about
Yeah, yeah.
Wakachina.
No, but how do you spell it? Do you know?
It's
There you go.
HUACA China.
Huacachina. Just so you guys can see how it's spelled. Huacachina.
It is a real place in the world, and it is supposedly was originally a natural oasis, and now it's a tourist trap. But it's totally worth seeing because how often are you seeing an oasis in the desert? So
Right. Well, real quick, I'll show it first to give some context. Well, first off, so you went to Peru, which is there in South America, compared to New York, up here.
yeah,
So,
you can see we're upstate New York.
so within Peru,
Debate about that.
the Lima is the capital. It's where people often fly into. It's a very large metropolitan city right on the coast, which is
I
really
think you
cool.
have to fly into Lima.
And then there's another thing that a lot of people will know Peru for is um, Machu Picchu, which is over here in this area. And then
Mm,
another major city is Cusco, right here, which sometimes
yeah,
you'll also see
Machu
spelled
Picchu is pretty close to Cusco.
with a Z. So a lot of times what you'll do is you'll come over here to Cusco, and then you'll come stay over here in this town, Aguas Calientes, or and then you'll go up into this whole reserve area, which is really cool. Another area that's pretty well known is Lake Titicaca, not only because of its fun name, but because it's also just a freaking massive lake. It feels almost like an ocean. I remember when I was flying over that. That was
And it's at high elevation. It's the claim to fame is the highest navigable lake,
nice. So for your
or
trip,
something to that effect.
you were here, and then you went over here as well. And then you were in
So
Lima as well, and then
I
here's the
did the
Oasis.
I did the Peru hop bus, which basically it takes you all over the south of Peru. So if you look from Lima, I went to Paracas, and then to Huacachina, and then to
Oh,
Arequipa.
Paracas, Arequipa.
Paracas is on the coast,
Yeah, I see Paracas there,
and
and
then
Arequipa down
Huacachina,
here.
and then Arequipa, and from Arequipa I went to the Canyon del Colca, which is I guess the second deepest canyon in the world, and it's also at high elevation. And I did a
Nice.
2 day trek in which I had to ride a mule because I had some elevation and sun poisoning, and it was terrifying. And then I went to Puno and Lake Titicaca and stayed on an island and did a homestay with an indigenous family. And then I went to Cusco and got stopped in a roadblock because they were striking and wouldn't let anyone through. And we were stuck there for like 12 hours. And then finally I got to Cusco, and I stayed, with the exception of when I went and did a 4 day trek on the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, I stayed in Cusco for like the second half of my trip.
Nice.
I had plans to go up north after my trek, but by the time I got to Cusco, I was just pretty exhausted from all the moving around and the tours and getting picked up at like 4 a.m. and taking overnight buses. And I
So
was
that was
just like,
the time
that
you
was
took
like the,
advantage of that
okay,
flexibility and changed your
yeah, I was
plans.
like, okay, I can't do this. And since I hadn't booked it ahead of time, uh, I was just like, I'm just gonna stay. And also, um, I was starting to run low on funding. So, uh, yeah,
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing that. And so here, this is Lima here, yeah.
yes,
A beautiful, beautiful picture there. City, very much like a city. And there's pretty
oh, yeah,
gardens and parks all along the coast here. Of course,
yeah.
food is a big attraction for me. A beautiful coast here. The markets, I remember that was a huge part that I really enjoyed. A little different than going to the grocery store and seeing all the fresh produce. And also, I have some pictures of the meat market where it's just a bunch of
Oh, yeah.
raw meat just kind of hanging there, not like in plastic wrap or behind counters or anything. It's just
Oh, yeah. I
all
have
just
some
hanging
pictures
there.
of that too. Not in
Yeah,
this collection, but
yeah. Um, all right, for
oh,
the
there's
last
the indigenous family that I stayed with
here, yeah, I
at the
wanted to
top.
come back to that. That was gonna be my
Yeah,
last picture that I was
yeah.
gonna
And
click
then
on.
there's the roadblocks too up there, higher. But
Oh, this is the roadblock.
yeah,
Okay.
there, and the one before it too.
All right. Yeah. Interesting. And protests, and then some mountains and some countryside type of things, and of course Machu Picchu. In case y'all aren't familiar with that, maybe you'll recognize that photo. Another aspect of scale and perspective. I mean, that's one of the cool things about Machu Picchu, and also a lot of Peru is seeing some of these things that have existed for I think thousands of years, at least at least hundreds, very long time, and having these pre-colonization civilizations. The Mayans or the Incas rather.
Yeah,
Um,
the
ha-
Incas were actually like the ones that were conquered by the Spaniards, so they weren't actually that long ago,
okay.
which is that actually surprised me. So they're actually like after Christ.
Okay. So but still hundreds of years. I mean, that's like
Yeah.
1500s or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So hundreds of years ago, and seeing, some remnants of that civilization, and also seeing, for me, one of the cool things was seeing there were literally some buildings where you could see the wall or the building where here is where the original stones were from the Incan colonization, the Incan civilization, and here's where the Spaniards came in, and you can actually see the
Yeah.
building technique change. And also, you can see is interesting. Hey, why are all the cracks in the Spanish side? That's like the newest side. It's all, even though the ancient technologies were more basic, they actually lasted longer.
Yeah.
You
Some
just
of
kind of
the Incan technologies are resistant to earthquake.
earthquake, seismic movements, things like that.
Yeah.
All right, so
So if
let's.
you look at some of the pictures from Cusco, you can see what you're talking about the stones and then the colonial, because all like a lot of Cusco is like that. So if you go, um,
Is this Cusco here?
yeah,
Yeah. So here's some of the stone building, and then a lot of the stucco and stuff on top.
yeah.
All right, let's go over to this picture, and then we'll have to call it a wrap. So tell us a little bit about what this homestead thing was like.
So that's on one of the islands. There's man-made islands, and then there's natural islands in Lake Titicaca, and then the man-made ones are made out of reed. Not to be confused with Reed, our host, but Reed, the material that grows in in the earth. And it's pretty strange. But anyway, I stayed on one of the natural islands called Amantani. And the people, this is the house I stayed at. They have like a guest area. And it's at high elevation. So at night it gets pretty cold, like 40 degrees or something. So they
Fahrenheit.
have these really, yeah, Fahrenheit, these really heavy blankets that are made out of alpaca wool. And there's not heat. There was electricity, but the toilets don't flush. You have to bring water from like a bucket to flush the toilet, and it's outside in like an outhouse. Um, I stayed over one night, and um, there were so like the whole like the way that they make money there is through tourism, and so there's like different villages and there's like tour companies and they all like have arrangements with the locals, and so like people, it's like a regular occurrence to
Right.
stay and do these homestays. And um, so I had my meals with the in the home, and we they did like a party for like the town, and I don't have a picture in there, but they had all of us tourists, they like got us dressed up in the uh, local
Traditional garb.
garb. Yeah. And so yeah, that was the overall experience.
Yeah.
And there was some other people staying in the place that I was staying, and he knew Spanish better than me, and so he kind of co-opted the conversation. But
Ah, what can you do? Well, I know. I think that's so cool that you're, at least getting a glimpse into what life could look like for some of these people, and recognizing, sure, maybe it's changed a little bit with tourism, but getting a peek into that culture and seeing what it's like, and eating some of the food and living where they live, and uh, even if just for a couple of days, seeing what it's like, I can only imagine that was very very valuable. And one of my favorite things about Latin America is also how colorful it is, and looking at the even just the colors of the walls and the clothes, and I don't know, I feel like it's very vibrant, and I feel like that also kind of translates into the people as well. But yeah, any other last thoughts on the homestay?
um, I guess it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, yeah.
But otherwise, no. I don't know. It's definitely an interesting experience. I did a homestay in Lima too, but it was complete opposite. So it was not like through a tourist means, it was through a language school. And my host, she lives in Miraflores, and she has a maid, and my meals were, except for lunches, my meals were prepared by the maid. And she had like a fancy apartment in which there's a picture of the living room in my collection of
Oh, that
pictures.
was her. That was her living room.
Yeah. And there's a picture of the two of us also later on. Her name is Cecilia.
Nice.
And um, she lives alone with her maid. So we spent a lot of time together, and she showed me around a little bit. And um, it really did a lot for my language skills. That was like, I wanted that immersion, and it was really helpful. So she talked to me exclusively in Spanish, and I could understand basically everything that she was saying. Sometimes I was kind of slow in my responding, but that's fine. And so she gave me some, she kind of showed me around and gave me a little orientation for my trip.
Nice.
And
Yeah, I
it
bet
was
that's
good.
valuable to have one person who you're working with for a little bit to kind of help cement that, and they can have that understanding and patience with you, and as you're not fumbling through, but working your way through and building up that language, those language skills. Well, cool. Well, I know we could talk all day, and I know we only just scratched the surface on what you did and your pictures. So whether we do it online or offline, I certainly look forward to seeing more and hearing more from you. But thank you so much for spending the time and telling us a little bit about what your experience with travel has been like and some of the value that you've gotten out of it. Um, if there's one message you would like to tell people, I would say, especially people who have not done um, international travel, what would you, or exploratory travel, what would you have? What would you say? I mean, I'm putting you on the spot here, obviously, but do you have any other parting thoughts, or you can feel free to take it from a different angle if you'd like.
Um, People often say that they envy my travel, or that they wish that they could travel, or they wish they could travel like I do. But it's really all about what your priorities are. And if travel becomes a priority for you, then you'll do it. Um, yeah, like we didn't spend time talking about how much it costs, but um, it can be as expensive or as cheap as you want. And youth hostels are not just for youth. So you can also get private rooms in hostels. And I did that a lot when I was in Peru, uh, partly for security and partly for my sanity. So,
Hmm.
uh, because I stayed in a hostel in Hawaii, and it was like $60 a night still. And I barely slept because people were snoring in my dorm. But in Peru, I didn't pay more than like $18 a night for a room, and I had private rooms almost the entire time. So it really, the scope varies drastically depending on where you are, but you can find ways if it's important to you, to travel. And I think that, like Reed said before, definitely travel, even if it's just to the next town over, because, well, I mean, I don't know if I would really call that traveling, but I mean, I guess it depends where in the world you are and what your situation is. But
Mm-hmm.
it just gives you a different perspective on people and things and life. And um, I, and like, to talk about the empathy part that we were talking about before. I mean, I think like in the time that we're going through right now, even though we're all connected and you can talk to people across the planet on the internet and all of that, like, nothing gives you more empathy for people than seeing how they live. And um, that's what traveling does. And it just makes you realize like we're all the same. And so like we're all going through things. Life is hard. Um, and it's, you just got to see it with your own eyes.
Yeah. And I would highly emphasize that because that's another thing I hear a lot is like, oh, well, why don't I just, I can watch the documentary, I can see this on a picture, I can watch a video, why would I do those, go out there and do this when I could do it all from the comfort of my own couch. And um, I would encourage you. I will believe you if you go and do it, and then you come back and tell me that's the same thing. It's one of those types of things where uh, prove me wrong. Tell me, go do that and tell me it's not the same. And I will say, like, for certain things or monuments, like if you're going to travel and you're like, I want to see the Eiffel Tower, and it's like, well, honestly, you might just be disappointed when you get there in person and like that's the only thing you're going for. It's like, hey, there's a monument or a building or a mountain. It's like, okay, it's cool, I
Mm-hmm.
saw it, check. Like if that's like all you're looking for, then maybe you would be better off just seeing the thing. But really, to me, travel is much more about the entire experience, the time in between. It's so easy for us to live life with this kind of checkbox mentality where it's like, hey, we need to do this and then do that and then get a house and then have a kid and get a dog and whatever it may be. It's so easy to have that checkbox mentality, but the beauty in living is living. And that may sound cheesy, but it's easy to forget and it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day grind and the day-to-day struggle. um, and part of travel is to take you outside of that, take you outside of that struggle and take you outside of that bubble you're within. Even if your bubble's bigger than other people's, like you're still within a bubble. So taking you outside of your bubble to say, hey, look, there's a whole world out there. And um, for as little as a weekend or a day trip, like you can gain perspective. You can find interesting people. You may meet somebody who changes your life. You may fall in love. I know we joked about it at the last episode, but you may make a new friend. You may try some food you never tried before. You may try a drink you've never tried before. But if you go and you have this sense of like curiosity and wonder and like looking for things, like even in the food picture, the whoops, wrong buttons. Um, the corn, even just the corn is different. It's like, hey,
Oh
I
my
know
God, it's
corn.
gigantic.
Right. I know corn, but no, corn is different and the food is different
Qué
and the
rico.
yeah. And we're very spoiled here in America with the depth and breadth of food that we can get even in a day. I could
Oh
go
yeah,
and
and I did not even show you the picture of the cuy.
yes, the cuy, yes, which is a guinea pig. And for those who are curious what that is, it's something that they eat as a delicacy down there.
And
But
I
yeah,
did not
between
show the
the
picture of alpaca meat either.
right, another one is potatoes. There's like so many potato
Oh my God,
varieties,
potatoes
and
and rice.
yes, and it's like,
I
oh
could
well,
not
I
eat
know
any more
potatoes,
potatoes and rice.
but the yeah, the bottom line is get out there, go experience it, and try
Yeah,
something,
yeah,
and engage with some people. Like even if you can't understand each other, and even if you can't talk, that is another thing about Latin America, especially is I found the people very helpful and very willing to try and help me have a good time, and I won't. I'll always remember in Mexico City one day I was walking around and some guy ran up to me. He's like, "Hey, where are you trying to go? Like, I can help you find where you're going." And I was like, "Well, I was going over here. I actually need a padlock so I can lock up my stuff." And like, "Oh, here, I know a guy." And he like took me over to this guy, and he went and talked to him and said it in like all this really fast Spanish, which I'm conversational in Spanish, but I can't talk that fast. And then he's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, this," and then, and it was like you could tell it just genuinely wanted to help and have not trying to sell me anything, and it was just trying to help me have a good time. So yeah,
yeah. I have a
that
couple of things
yeah,
that
go
came
for
to
it.
mind after all of that. So, one is I heard a quote recently that business books are not business. right? And that may not seem like a relevant quote, but it just, that's what came to mind when we were talking about the idea of like, why should I actually go someplace where I can just look at the pictures or watch a documentary from the comfort of my own home? Because looking at pictures and watching a documentary isn't the same as having an experience. And then the other thing is, when you're talking about, you said something like living, the beauty of it is living, or something like that. Well, it's the, or, and then getting stuck in the, like the checklist of like, oh, I saw this check, I saw that check. Like it's really easy to get stuck in that, but it's something that really I experienced to my core in Hawaii was, the journey is the destination.
Yeah.
So not all of travel is just about seeing the place that, and then checking it off the list. It's about the whole experience of getting there and what it takes. And so that was part of why, like with Machu Picchu, you could do a 1 day tour to Machu Picchu, get there and then be done with it and like conserve time and do other stuff. But I was like, no, like I'm going to the land of the Inca. I'm going to do how I'm going to get to Machu Picchu the way they did. And so I did a 4 day trek to on the Inca Trail to get to Machu Picchu, and like like okay, I recognize that is not an experience that is for everyone, and also it's pretty expensive. I mean, it was affordable to me because I'm of course coming from the United States and dollars and everything, but like you know, comparatively, it's pretty expensive. Um, but it's about the experience, not just checking Machu Picchu off of my list of places I've seen, you
Right.
know.
No, and yeah. So I want to mention the a quote, and then I'm hanging up on you because we could literally go on forever. So, y-
Oh,
y-
wow, it's late.
yes. So as we were talking, one of the quotes that came up is from one of my favorite authors, Brandon Sanderson, who does fantasy novels, and it's life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination, and then it's journey before destination is the part that kind of popped into my head when you were talking about it's about the journey, right? And of course we hear, I know a lot of people have heard something similar to that. It's about the journey and not the destination, and it's kind of cheesy, but that's really what it's about. And there's studies that show when you have a goal in the future that you set and you go and you achieve that goal, like you're not getting as much of a positive hit from actually achieving that thing. It's more about focusing on the progress and getting the small steps along the way and finding the value in between and all of those types of things. So travel is a great way to experience that. So with that, Caylena, thank you so much for your time and for your pictures and for your stories and your perspective. Hopefully for our viewers out back home. I don't know why I said out back home. Our viewers out there. Hopefully, you guys got some value out of this,
They're in
and
the outback
right, and got
at
a little
home.
bit of inspiration for some travel that you guys might like to do. So, with that, Caylena, sayonara. To use another language, Miss Polyglot.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for having me, Reed. It's been great chatting, and you're right. We could probably talk all day about this.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, and have a good rest of your day.
You too.
Bye. All right. Well, thank you guys for taking that journey with us. Of course, this was a little longer than an average episode, but for me, this is a really important topic. And, I've had many people when talking about this show, like, oh, why don't you do it shorter or, whatnot. And I was like, and here we are doing a longer one. Well, that's because I think a lot of the value is in hearing more and not just watching that soundbite or seeing that thing or checking that off. It's about um, having the having the experience, right? Kind of like we were talking about there near the end. Living is about the living and enjoying the journey and not just the destination. And a big element of that, as Caylena talked about, was experiencing things with other people, which is an interesting thing because she actually traveled by herself, right? But yet, as she was traveling, she was interacting with others. She stayed in the home of other people, which one approach she took was to try and experience life like some people who live in Peru actually experience it, and not just the touristy side of things. So that's something that I really appreciate. And Danielle and I have said that one of our favorite ways to travel in an ideal world is we never go somewhere where we don't know at least one person who's going to help us learn the way of the locals and get that insight and say, oh, you should check this out and check that out and go see these things and eat those things. And, there's so much about travel we could talk about, and I'm sure we'll talk about it many times again. And we've talked about it in the past. And Danielle and I will have more conversation about the travel that we've done. And I'm sure one day me and my brother will talk about our trip to South America. But the bottom line with all of this is to encourage you guys to think about travel and to plan something, do something big, to add some perspective for price. If when it goes to Peru, I just looked up Dallas to Lima, and the prices were anywhere from $500 to $1,000 for a flight, which is kind of about twice or so what it would cost us to go to another American city. So it's like, hey, for 2 trips to New York, for example, I could instead go to Peru. And then when you're there, the beauty of it is your cost is so much lower. As you heard Caylena say, the most expensive place she stayed while she was down there was $18. And, that is compared to if you were to go stay in New York, good luck finding something for less than $180. So, you could stay for a longer time, and you can the biggest cost really is getting there, and then your daily costs can be very low. So that's the beauty of Latin America, and that's why I highly encourage people to consider traveling there. And if you are looking for something that is, not quite as big of a price jump, don't think that there's not other things you could do. For example, Mexico City, $230 from Dallas. And so that is less than you could fly to a lot of places in the U.S. So going somewhere else and experiencing life in a different way is an extremely powerful thing, especially if you're someone who is going through something or you just went through something. I think it is a great way to kind of, the phrase coming to mind is press the reset button on life. It kind of helps you refresh what you think life is for and what your perspective is. And it helps you figure out, what is the point of all of these things, right? And at the very least, it's like, this is a really cool experience. And, one other tidbit, Caylena just chatted me, was that from New York to Colombia, her flight was $300, which is extremely, and that was business class. So, the numbers I mentioned were just a quick Google. If you're dedicated and price is something that's really important to you, especially if you're flexible, you can find all sorts of deals. And this isn't even getting into the world of airline miles, which is a whole other way to get things as inexpensively as possible. There's a whole world out there ready for you to explore. And if money is really the only thing that is holding you back, rest assured there are thousands and thousands of people who have that exact same concern. And there are plenty of books and websites and videos about ways to travel on a budget. So all you need to do is just say, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to travel somewhere, and then start planning it, start making it happen. As Caylena said, it's about setting those priorities. So if you set that as a priority, then it's just about setting that plan to make that happen. Maybe that part of that's saving money, maybe part of that's research. But again, don't feel like a need to over research it, and make sure you utilize people who have been there before, people who live there, people who tell people about this stuff for a living, and you will hopefully have a great time. So that is our challenge for today, is make a travel plan. And again, I would encourage you guys to go farther than you've gone. Maybe you've never been outside of your county. Maybe you've never been outside of your state. Maybe you've never been outside of the country. So pick somewhere and make it somewhere different, where people look different, people think different, people eat different, whatever it may be. Just make it something different, because it's so easy to forget what life means and what life is. And it's so hard to understand until you start to have some more of these experiences and hear some more experiences from other people. And the more we all have a skewed perspective on what life is, and none of us truly knows what the whole purpose of it all is, right? But a lot of people have guesses and thoughts. And so the more of these guesses and thoughts you get, the more approximations you get, the closer maybe you can get to the real thing, quote unquote, or at least the real thing as it matters to you. So that's the challenge. Pick something. Let us know if you guys have questions. And with that, you guys have a wonderful day.